at the end of the day, it's kind of irrelevant if a client doesn't like a creative, because we don't know if it's actually going to produce good results at mass. All right, so that kind of takes us on to testing. Testing is done pretty strategically with a hierarchy of priority. We start with audiences, and kind of my pitch to this is always explaining to clients that you could have like the best product in the world, the most compelling copy, the coolest video ever to sell the product. But if you're putting it in front of the wrong people, it's never going to go anywhere. You're not going to get any sales. You could be, being a butcher shop, selling your content or putting your content in front of a bunch of vegans. It's not going to go anywhere. So nailing down the audiences first is the key piece to performance. From there, we move on to creative testing. So again, that's going to be getting as much creative from the client, adding it to whatever audiences we found to be the best performers. And then we can start to figure out if a certain set of creatives are going to perform. And, let's say just an objective number, we add 10 creatives to one audience. We're going to be able to find 3 or 4 of them that are top performers and cut the other ones. And then we take the best performers, we match them up with the best audiences, and you've got a winning pair between that two. Copy is the one that probably has the least needle moving factor of an ad. It's going to be the other part of that, though, is that clients are going to spend the most time on copy. So it's important that we get copy approved up front, and then we kind of just put it on the back burner and let clients know that we'll revisit this in the future, but there's other areas that we need to fine tune before we come back to the copy. Again, you're going to have tons of issues with clients and copy. They're never going to love it. There's always going to be little things here and there that they want to tweak, but just reiterating to them that unfortunately or fortunately, however you feel about this, but people just don't seem to read as much these days. So copy typically doesn't resonate as much with people. For example, if you had a creative that didn't say anything about a promotion, but then you had the promotion only in the copy, I'd say 50% of the people are going to see what the promotion actually is. And the other 50% of people are going to scroll right by it because they're not even going to read it. So just something for more so for client considerations, that explaining to them that it doesn't really move the needle too much. Here's another important piece for clients in particular is opinions do not matter. It's a hard pill for a lot of clients to swallow, but at the end of the day, it's kind of irrelevant if a client doesn't like a creative, because we don't know if it's actually going to produce good results at mass scale. We need to put it in front of an audience before we can actually decide whether or not to run it or whether or not to put it on pause. But lots of times you're going to have difficult clients that don't like a particular creative that we've created or they've generated, whatever the case is. And you just need to sit them down and say that I understand that we're not going to spend a ton of money on it, but we do need to test it. And unless it's blatantly against their brand guidelines or something like that, I always err on the side of let's test it. There's no harm in testing it. I know that we're going to spend a few dollars on it, but at least we'll know if it's going to be a performer or not. And that kind of leads me to the second part of that, is that creative testing should be done with radically different content. Here's a good example of what not to do. This client, Tossin, gave us a ton of content. It's probably a batch of 50 different creatives that they shared with us. But these two that I've highlighted here are basically identical. And this is really not the way to test. You can see here, this is one image. All they have is the text overlaid of their brand name. And then they have the same image with like kind of a CTA here, Summer Cardi's shop now. So realistically, you're testing the same image with a slight variation. So essentially what's happening in this audience is that we've spent, call it $35 on one image. but it's split between two different ads because the image is slightly varying. It's just not the best use of a client's spend. What I would prefer to do is nail down whether this image as a whole is going to be a performer, like the model wearing this particular clothing item is going to perform. And then if the client wants to start testing the call to action on the text overlay versus the branding on it, that would be a secondary piece of this testing. So just remembering that with clients, that if they want to get the most bang for their buck and kind of get past this period of testing as quickly as possible and learning, it's best to fine tune the testing so that you're, again, testing radically different creatives against each other. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? Kind of breeze right through the testing stuff, but okay, cool. Moving on to, I guess, yeah, go ahead, Vivek.
I just have one question.
Yep.
What's your view on using emojis on text part of ads? Is it good or?
I think it comes down to the brand itself. There's going to be brands like the one that I just showed. This is not a brand, I guess both of these. This is not really a brand where you would use emojis. Like it's
okay.
They're trying to instill this high quality aspect to it.
Okay.
And even a lot of these brands don't even want to showcase any promotions that are running, like a free shipping or 15% off the first purchase. This can sometimes even be difficult to get a client to allow you to add. But there's certain other clients, other accounts where, like, we have a lip balm brand, for example, that's very fun and colorful. That's the perfect time to use emojis. And I think they do instill a little bit of like that eye-catching nature to a set of copy. And I think it can be quite effective. It just needs to be used, obviously not overused, used correctly, and then on the right brands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. All right, and just to button up testing, so for the first 1 to 2 months, that's a heavy testing period typically when we're first launching with a client, and we're going to be really in the thick of testing everything we can. But after that period, once we break out of that and we have some winners and we're feeling comfortable about results increasing, we always reserve, call it 10 to 15% of the budget for testing. Like I said previously, creative fatigue can set in pretty quickly. So it's always good to be working on the next set of winners. And that's when, going back to what I talked about first, is asking for creative is not a one and done ask. It's a consistent requirement of the client. And just because we have a creative service doesn't mean that they can provide us with 20 creatives and expect that that's going to last them a year. It's a constant battle. And clients need to also know that they're not only producing new content when they have a new product launch or a new promotion or something. It's evergreen content is just as important. I guess I'll start off by creative requirements, because that's a pretty important part and really separates the two platforms. What I always explain to clients is the more content, the better. Ask clients for every single thing that they've got. If they give us 500 creatives up front, that's awesome. Next month, where's the rest?